Hi, everyone. Welcome to tonight's conversation with Dr. Ned Hallowell. I'm Leah Gravier, and I'm going to sort of manage the Zoom room tonight. And I ask that everyone mute themselves if they're not speaking. And if you have a question, please, you can either use your hand emoji or you can write your question in the chat feature at the bottom of the screen. I'm going to hand it over to Neve Merluccio, who will welcome everyone.
Hi, good evening. It's so great to see lots of faces here tonight, and we are just so delighted to have Dr. Hallowell back again. He was with us last year, and it just went down so great, and so many people asked us, when are you having Dr. Hallowell back again? So Leah got on the phone and booked you, and I'm so glad you were available. So thank you, Leah, for following through, and thank you, Dr. Hallowell, for joining us.
Oh, thank you for inviting me. It's a pleasure.
Yeah,
by the way, if you hear noise behind me, it's my dog. He has to make his presence known. So
that's fine. I think he did the same thing last time, right?
Yeah, probably.
That's okay. So, you know, we're Leah and I are the co-chairs of the Bronxville Organization for Learning Differences, also known as BOLD, and there's a committee behind us. And we were just, you know, we are here to represent families. And there's lots of us who have children with 504s and IEPs and lots of ADHDers out there also. So we are thrilled that, you know, you can share your valuable information with us. So I just want to give everyone some background on Dr. Hallowell. He's a board certified child and adult psychiatrist and world authority on ADHD. He's a graduate of Harvard and Tulane Medical School and was a Harvard Medical School faculty member for 21 years. He's also the founder of the Hallowell ADHD Centers in Boston, in New York, San Francisco, Palo Alto, and in Seattle. He has spent more than 4 decades helping thousands of adults and children live happy and productive lives through his strength-based approach to neurodiversity, and has ADHD and dyslexia himself. Dr. Hallowell, as we know, is a New York Times best-selling author. He has written over 20 books. Is it 21 books?
21.
21 on multiple, you know, psychological topics, and he's groundbreaking Distraction series, which began with Driven to Distraction, was co-authored with Dr. John Ratey in 1994, and that sparked a revolution in understanding of ADHD. So as we know, Dr. Hallowell joined us last year, and we also have Dr. Joyce Vistola with us. And so we're thrilled to have a lively discussion this evening. So I will hand it over to you. Do you want to say a few words, Dr. Vistola, first?
Hi, good evening. It's so great to see everybody. You know, we miss parents. We miss parents in the building. No, I myself would like to hear every pearl of wisdom from Dr. Hallowell. I do want to say, buy this book. I'm not getting a cut. I'm not his agent. It really it's best parenting practices. Whether you have a child who struggles with an overabundance of attention or not, this is one of my all-time favorite Hallowell books because it's real, that and Connections, because it's the best advice for parenting. So that's all I have to say. Good evening. I'm looking forward to it.
Thank you so much. By the way, it is by far my shortest book. I finally understood my audience. It's only about 100 pages long. So shall we just jump right into the questions? You all submitted some questions in advance, and they were kindly sent along to me. And please, as we're going, put your questions in the chat room or raise your little emoji hand, and let's make this as interactive as we can. I think it's more stimulating that way. The days of talking heads, I think, are long gone. At least they should be. So I don't want to just be a talking head droning on. I want to interact with you all. Um, as others have said, I have ADHD and dyslexia myself, so I have to, I have to work to stay engaged. For us, boredom is our kryptonite. We can't do boredom. So the minute stimulation wanes, we go off and search for stimulation. And by the way, the term attention deficit, is a complete misnomer. We don't have a deficit of attention. We have an abundance of attention. Our challenge is to control it. And when you refer to the strength-based approach, it simply means that I don't treat disabilities. I help people unwrap their gifts. And that shift in emphasis makes a big difference. So a kid or an adult doesn't come to me to be fixed. They come to me to discover their talents and develop them and promote them. And that shift in emphasis makes a big difference. And that sort of leads me to the first question. One of you asked, how do you explain this condition to children? And should you name it? Should you just say you have a case of gobbledygook? And I don't favor the gobbledygook approach. So what I think you should do is say, let's say to Fritz, Fritz, you're a very lucky boy. You have an amazing brain. It's sometimes called ADHD, and you can tell him what that stands for, attention deficit hyperactivity disorder, because he'll hear the term, but it's just a mouthful of syllables that'll mean nothing to him. A much better way for it to understand the kind of brain you have is, do you know what a Ferrari is, Fritz? A Ferrari is like a race car. It's like a really fast car. Well, your brain is like a Ferrari. You've got a Ferrari for a brain. You've got a race car for a brain. Your brain goes lickety-split really, really, really fast. The only problem is your brakes aren't strong enough to control it. So you've got a race car for a brain with bicycle brakes. But I'm a brake specialist, so I can help you strengthen your brakes. And when you do that, you'll become a champion. And that really does sum up what this condition is. You have a race car for a brain, and your challenge is control. And over the course of your growing up years, you'll learn how to control it. So instead of crashing into the wall or spinning out at the curve, you'll win the race and you'll become a champion. And I can promise you, Fritz, you will become a champion for sure. You have champion written all over you. And that's the way you should explain it to a kid, or to an adult for that matter. This is something to celebrate. It doesn't mean there isn't a downside. There certainly is a downside, but we can work on that. And the upside, you can't buy and you can't teach. And people don't realize this. The problematic side, problems with organization, so-called executive functioning, the downside we can correct, but the upside you have to be born with. And so what's the upside? What makes me love this condition so much and be glad I have it? Well, we're the creatives. We're the originals. We're the ones who don't, conform. We're the ones who strike out in new directions. We're the ones who come up with the bright new ideas. We're the visionary, the dreamer, the inventor, the discoverer, the pathfinder, the trendsetter. We're the ones who see what other people don't see. We're also the truth tellers. We'll say the king has no clothes, and we're also incredibly big-hearted. We champion the underdog. We're strong-willed to the point of being stubborn. We're ferociously loyal. We're got a wonderful sense of humor, often a zany sense of humor. We're quirky, we're funny, we make other people laugh. We're fun to be with. Yes, we can be frisky, but that particular symptom, I think it's exaggerated and stereotyped. People think it's just little boys running around bumping into things, and there's so much more to it than that. It really is a condition of creativity. And if you think about it, the three core symptoms that define this condition in the diagnostic manual And so the diagnostic manual is all about pathology, all about the downside. Distractibility, impulsivity, and hyperactivity. Those are and in fact, the diagnosis is made. There's an axis of symptoms describing inattention, and there's an axis of symptoms describing impulsivity and hyperactivity. You take those three negatives and turn them on their head, and you get a positive. And this is a really important point, because with almost every negative attribute associated with ADHD, there's a positive flip side. So let's look at those three. You take distractibility, sort of the hallmark symptom, the condition after which the condition is erroneously named attention deficit. What is curiosity but a form of distractibility? If you didn't care what that noise was outside, you wouldn't attend to it. If you didn't care, what's underneath that rock, you wouldn't lift it up. If you didn't care why that Petri dish looks different than when you left it, you wouldn't investigate and discover penicillin. So curiosity is really our driving force. We are driven by curiosity. It can get us into trouble if we stick our nose into places where we shouldn't. But it can also lead to Nobel Prizes. By the way, most of you have heard of the PCR test for COVID. PCR stands for polymerase chain reaction. And the man who discovered that, or invented that really, back in 1993, his name is Kary Mullis. And he won the Nobel Prize in chemistry. And it's thought of as, next to the double helix, the biggest advance in biology in the past 100 years. Kary Mullis has flaming ADD. He's in heaven now, so I should say he had. He was just the most eccentric, wonderful, creative man you'd ever want to meet. And he gave us this incredibly important discovery, typical of someone who has ADHD. So curiosity is really our driving motivation. Why do we do most of the things we do, for good and for ill, can come back to curiosity. We want to know why. We want to know what. We want to know what's going on. We want to know what's underneath that. What's inside of that. What's that person thinking about? What's hidden? What is being hidden from me? What's the secret? We're born detectives. We're born problem solvers. We're looking in unusual places. We're imagining unusual things, and our brains are just constantly cooking and creating them. So curiosity is the flip side of distractibility. Okay, impulsivity. That's another major grouping of major negative symptom. Impulsivity. Oh, he's so impulsive. She's so impulsive. Makes decisions without thinking. Fire, ready, aim, and a lot of the trouble people get into of all ages relating to ADD comes back to impulsivity. I can't tell you how many women I asked to marry me on the first date. I said, we're having fun. Why don't we just make it last? And they're very impulsive. Fortunately, they had better breaks than I did, so I didn't get married a dozen times. But it continues. But this impulsivity, this weakening of brakes, this getting carried away with your own enthusiasm. What is creativity? Think about it for a minute now. What is creativity but impulsivity gone right? You don't plan to have a bright new idea. Kary Mullis didn't plan to invent the PCR reaction. It came to him. In fact, he writes about it. It came to him. He was driving in his car one night in California, and he suddenly saw it all come together. That's impulsivity gone right. That's creativity. That's our gift. It can also be our curse. Like I said, every one of the ways of being that are associated with ADHD has an upside and a downside, a positive and a negative. Well, with creativity, you don't plan to have a creative idea. You don't say it's 3 o'clock, my time for my creative idea, and lay it like an egg. No, creativity happens unbidden, spontaneously, depends upon some degree of disinhibition, some degree of weak brakes, some degree of impulsivity. And that's why if you try to stamp out impulsivity, if you try to become too regimented, too controlling, too insisting, then you can choke out the wonderfulness of these children and have them just live in fear, because they can't control their race car brain. And if they're constantly getting, scolded or spanked, that still happens because of their impulsive behavior. They'll grow up in fear, and then what happens is their self-esteem suffers, and a lot of damage gets done. And then the third of the triad of distractibility, impulsivity, and finally hyperactivity, you get to be my age. I'm 72. It's called energy. I'm really glad I've got this turbo pack on my back. I'm really glad that, I can still be going strong at 7:15 in the evening, and wanting to do it and feeling excited about it without the aid of any performance enhancing drugs other than coffee, so that's what we need these kids to understand. I want them to, like Fritz, I want him to be so proud of the brain he's got. And if anybody ever tells you, Fritz, you have anything but a race car brain with bicycle brakes, you tell them they don't know what they're talking about. Because Fritz is the kind of person that has made and will make this country great. We're a nation of innovators. Thomas Edison was a classic ADD. The reason we learn that we lead the world in entrepreneurialism is we have so much ADD. And if you think about it, who colonized this country? Who came over here? Who in the world would get on a boat in England in 1600 and come over here? You had to be a risk-taking, swashbuckling, march to the beat of your own drum kind of person. Because a lot of you didn't even know if you'd arrive here alive, and a lot of people didn't. And if you look at the lives of those early colonists, I wanted to put a chapter about it in my new book, but the publisher said, "Oh, the historians will go after you because that's their territory." But I read a lot about their lives. It's like an ADD Hall of Fame. And in fact, Jamestown almost perished the first winter. They got through one winter because they still had leadership. The leadership had to go back to England. And so for the second winter, they were on their own. And typical ADD fashion, they didn't prepare for the winter. They couldn't get their act together. They didn't stock up food. They didn't put away, blankets and be ready for the snow. Their snowplow budget was whatever. They lost a lot of lives that winter because they were not prepared. So that's the downside of ADD. But the upside is they prevailed. They survived. And now it is also true that those colonies and our early history was built on two things we now deplore: slavery and tobacco, and that's the downside of why we did well. But the upside is a bunch of innovators, a bunch of very clever, very resourceful folks with ADD, and so our gene pool is loaded for this condition. And this is a genetically transmitted condition. If one parent has it, the odds are 1 in 3 that a given child will have it. If both parents have it, the odds are 2 in 3 that a given child will have it. My wife Sue and I have 3 kids. I have ADD, and we've now decided she has it as well. And all 3 of our kids have ADD. So my daughter Lucy, who's 32, and works for the National Football League. So she's real busy preparing for the Super Bowl right now. And then my son Jack, who's at home with us and works with me, but he really wants to become a carpenter and a contractor. He's always been good with his hands. And then our youngest Tucker also lives in New York and works for a PR agency called Inkhouse. The kids, by the way, you're all parents. And I wrote a book about how to raise kids called The Childhood Roots of Adult Happiness. And I can't tell you how much raising those kids meant to me. I want to say means to me, because to me, I'm still raising them, even though they're 32, 29, and 26. But if you want my first rule of parenting, My first rule of parenting, what above all else, what should a parent do? Enjoy your children. If you're having fun with them, it's almost for sure you're doing it right, unless you're just smoking dope with them all day. But you know, if you're having fun with them, it's almost for sure you're doing it right. And guess what? It's as good for you as it is for them. You know, the basic activity of childhood should be play. But I contend that should also be the basic activity of adulthood. My definition of play, like right now, I'm playing with you. My definition of play is any activity in which your imagination lights up. So right now, my imagination is pumping. I'm playing with you. I hope you're playing as you listen. And that's why I'd like it to be interactive, you know, but I hope what I'm saying is sparking ideas in you, reactions in you, and that's play. I mean, that's why the lecture format is so deadening, and that's why the teaching model of memorize and forget is so deadening, you know, and why the model of wanting kids to do exactly what they're told, what you end up with. And I learned this, I spent 20 years ago, a couple of years consulting to the Harvard chemistry department because they had one of their most gifted graduate students committed suicide. So I got to know that department very well. And every year they, you know, there are 5 Nobel Prize winners on the Harvard chemistry faculty. So every year they'd get a new crop of, and it's a huge department, like 1,000 graduate students and postdocs. They'd get a new crop of graduate students and postdocs. And the mandate would be go into the lab and discover new knowledge, you know, win a Nobel Prize. Well, they quickly segregated into 2 groups. One group would run into the lab, just hallelujah, here I am with all the resources of this wonderful university, you know, I'm gonna, you know, watch out, truth, because I'm gonna storm your gates. The other group would freeze, and they'd say, no, you've got to tell me what to do. I can't come up with something on my own. I'll do anything you want. I'll grade your papers. I'll run your experiments all night. I'll give your lectures for you if you're too drunk to come in, and a lot of them were. But that's the group that way back around when they were Fritz's age got the message that what you should do to do well in life is do exactly what you're told. And they got very good at that. They could do exactly what they were told. And so they scored way high on tests. But what they lost was the key element for being a person who can contribute something new to the world, is their capacity to play, their capacity to imagine, to think outside of the routine instead of just repeating the routine. And so it's really important, particularly with these children, that you make sure they have a creative outlet. The reason I write so many books, it's not that I'm ambitious to write books, is if I don't have a book going, I get depressed. And same thing with Fritz. I'll bet if Fritz doesn't have some kind of creative activity in a given day, he just won't feel like himself. But for him, it comes so spontaneously. I mean, he's creating when he's talking. He's creating when he's, you know, and that's, and you just don't want to get in his way. You know, you don't want to have the educational system start insisting that he behave like, you know, he's at a board meeting at IBM. And so you want to make sure they continue to be able to play, and because that's their greatest asset, our imagination. That's what we have. That is our greatest asset. Now, it also happens to be our greatest enemy. And in chapter 2 of the new book, we talk about that, how your greatest asset can become your greatest enemy, and it start attacking you, and you have brood and you ruminate. And that's common in ADD, and we get into ways of dealing with that. But anyway, that's a long answer about how to explain it to a child, but it needs a long answer because it's so much more complex and rich and interesting and potentially, you know, disruptive. In fact, I was just part of a documentary about this condition. We named the documentary The Disruptors. We're disruptive in in the best sense of that word. We changed the course of history. Whoever invented the wheel had ADD for sure. And, you know, give you an example, David Neilman, who's become a friend of mine, he founded JetBlue Airlines. And he's the guy who invented the electronic ticket. And I think it is ironic that it's someone with ADD who thinks of a way for us to go to the airport and not have to remember to bring our ticket. you know, and he's also the guy who came up with the idea of putting television sets in the seat, in the back of the seat in front of you. Because remember, I said boredom is our kryptonite. So, you know, if you've got a TV there, you won't be bored. So, again, we're always innovating. We're always coming up with something new. And that's just don't get in the kids' way. I mean, sure, you have to have order in the classroom. They can't all be doing whatever they want. You'd have chaos. So there's no doubt you need structure. Absolutely. You need rules. You need expectations. I'm not saying laissez-faire and, you know, let them do whatever they want. But I am saying don't go to the other extreme and try to turn them into a, you know, a regimented military outfit. By the way, the military is a great place for people with ADD because it combines high stimulation with structure. I've done some work with the Navy SEALs and they've all got it. And they say, but we don't need medication because danger is our medication. And it is true, high stimulation, you know, gets the adrenaline flowing, and adrenaline is chemically very similar to the medications we use to treat ADHD. I'm going to go to another question, but I want you to get excited about this condition. And if your child has it, I want you to be happy about that. It does make more work for you. It is more labor intensive, and you need a team, and you need others, and you need, you know, I remember my wife saying, why couldn't we have had easy children? Well, it wasn't in the genes, you know, so, but our kids were so much fun. And as I said, the most rewarding thing I've ever done in my life is participate in the raising of our children. I came from a very crazy family myself. I tell folks I come from a family characterized by the WASP triad, which is alcoholism, mental illness, and politeness. So I grew up in the midst of chaos. And so my most important life's goal was to create to give my kids the happy childhood I didn't have. And I like to think, in fact, I know we succeeded. And it's just the most wonderful thing in the world. It's the most wonderful thing in the world. So those of you who have kids Fritz's age, and when you're feeling exasperated some days, just savor it, cherish it, treasure it. Yes, there'll be days when you'd like to hand in your parent card, but believe me, in the long run, there's nothing more important than you'll ever do than raise a child, and particularly a child who has this trait, because it makes them a little bit more difficult. You know, a well-trained gorilla could raise a lot of kids, but these kids, they need a little bit more than that. I want you to get pumped up about this condition. I also want you to think to yourselves, if you might have it yourself, that the biggest undiagnosed group are adult women, and particularly high achieving adult women, because the doctors think, well, you couldn't have it. Look how well you're doing. You know, you know, like I said, you can win a Nobel Prize and have it. So your absolute level of achievement is irrelevant. The question is, could you be doing better? And almost invariably, if a woman who's doing well in life, successful, quote unquote, goes for help, almost always she'll get diagnosed with depression and anxiety and put on an SSRI, which is the last thing she needs. And yes, she does have symptoms that look like depression, but it's not real depression. It's frustration over untreated ADD. And yes, she'll be anxious because she's wondering, what am I going to forget next? And if you're a mom and working and all that, you got a lot to keep track of. Well, it's hard to do and if you have an ADD brain. Okay, I'm going to take a breath there and pause before I go on to the next question. Any of you want to make a comment or throw in a remark or ask a question?
I just want to say that I can totally relate to the idea of you're always parenting, even at a child's older age. Like I have a child now who's 21 going on 22, and I feel like you're still in it and part of the whole process when you have a child with ADHD. It doesn't just all of a sudden cure itself and you move on, and it's a part of your kind of family dynamic and sort of how all your kids are getting raised with this awareness in your family's life, and how that impact. I wonder if you could speak to how that might impact your whole family life, and you know, how to even talk to your other kids about it, or what impact.
Talk to the other kids in the same way. You know, say, Fritz has a race car brain, and his brakes need some work. And then the kids say, well, how come he gets so much extra time? How come he gets so much more of your attention? Don't you like us? And you say, of course, we love you all equally, but Fritz, he's got this work to do on his brakes, so we got to help him with that. And if you had something you needed, we'd help you with that. It's all a matter of our responding to the child who needs us, and we know you all need us. And by the way, if you could help out with Fritz instead of kicking him in the butt every time you can when nobody's looking, that would be nice too. So try to explain to them, be as transparent as you can be. Fritz has a race car brain with bicycle brakes. By the way, it's a wonderful way to intervene, because you do have to intervene. But instead of "you're a bad boy, stop it," you say your brakes are failing you. And then once you've explained it to Fritz, he'll say, yeah, I got to work on my brakes, don't I? Because he doesn't want to be disruptive. He doesn't want to, make the dinner or the restaurant or what have you into a big scene. And he feels bad about it afterwards. So you intervene by saying, your brakes, oh yeah, I got to work on my brakes. I got to work on my brakes. See, there's no shame in that. The shame is what's toxic, is don't shame these kids. They get so much of that. The real disabilities are shame and fear and believing something's wrong with you. I'll tell you a quick story about one of the best interventions I ever had. I started first grade in Chatham, Massachusetts, a little town on Cape Cod, back in 1955. Eisenhower was president, and I still remember this. We like Ike and all that. Anyhow, so I show up in 1955 for first grade, and what's the main task of first grade? Learning how to read. Well, we'd be sitting at these little round tables, taking turns, see-spot run. Come to be my turn, I couldn't do it. I'd stammer, I'd stutter. Back then, it was not a very sophisticated world, and particularly Chatham was just a sleepy town. It used to be called a drinking town with a fishing problem. And and so if you couldn't learn to read, your diagnosis is you were stupid, and the treatment plan was try harder. Well, I was lucky. There was more. I had a first grade teacher who knew there was more to it than that. And to get you to try harder, they'd punish you. They'd humiliate you. Well, Mrs. Eldridge was her name, and she had no formal training in reading that I know of, but she'd been teaching first grade for about 75 years. And she was this old, plump lady. And during reading period, she would simply come over and pull up a little chair and get her ample bottom onto the chair and sit herself down next to me. And it was back when old ladies used to wear a lot of powder, if you remember that. So she'd sort of arrive like a sugar donut and have this cloud for the two of us to sit in. And she'd put her arm around me. And so there'd be, her forearm, my little head, and this enormous cushion of a bosom that she'd hug me into. And none of the kids would laugh at me as I would stammer and stutter because I had the mafia sitting next to me. And that was my treatment plan. That was my IEP, was Mrs. Eldridge's arm. But it was so brilliant. I looked forward to reading period. I looked forward to that hug. I looked forward to publicly demonstrating my incompetence, which is quite something for a 6-year-old Fritz's age boy to do. But I loved reading period, even though I was the worst reader in the class, because of Mrs. Eldridge's arm. That arm treated the real disabilities of shame and fear and believing I was defective. By the end of the year, I was still the worst reader in the class, but I was the most enthusiastic student of reading. The part of my brain that did have talent with words was getting activated. And I ended up majoring in English at Harvard while doing pre-med, even though I had major dyslexia, incredibly slow reader. To this day, I'm a really slow reader. It takes me forever to get through a book. My wife says, I don't know how you know anything. It takes me so long to read something. But thanks to Mrs. Eldridge's arm, I didn't turn off the reading. In fact, I loved it, even though it was a struggle. That's what these kids need. You need to get Mrs. Eldridge's arm around them, one way or another, however you do it, literally or figuratively. That arm has stayed around me ever since. It's around me right now as I'm talking to you. Mrs. Eldridge is up there in heaven, and she's got a long arm all the way down and around me. And she's saying, don't worry, They're not laughing at you. You know, you're doing okay. And I swear to you that force has stayed with me. You know, she got something going then that was I needed from somewhere else beyond my parents, because they were off being crazy anyway. But you know, that woman was like a fairy godmother. She changed my life forever simply by giving me a safe place to be who I was. And she didn't excuse me from it. I didn't have any accommodations or anything like that. She insisted that I keep trying, but I wanted to keep trying because she made it so comfortable. And I did have, you know, again, what I just said earlier, the upside and the downside. The downside was I couldn't decode. The upside was I had real talent with words. And so that's what you want to be doing with these kids. You want to be always trying to identify and promote latent talents, hidden interests, you know, and just keep fanning the flames of whatever it might happen to be, because that'll turn into, you know, what they do for the rest of their lives. If they're Fritz's age is so critical that, you know, you want to make sure, you know, that sparkle in his eye doesn't get extinguished. For that matter, the mischievousness of him doesn't get extinguished. His silliness doesn't get extinguished. You know, all of these things can turn into positive qualities. They're part of his special sauce, but it's still being you know, stirred and adjusted and seasoned and promoted and developed. And that's it's just real important that you keep that positive approach.
There's a question in the chat. Delphine says, as a mom, the impulsivity of my teen girl scares me in front of the dangers she will have to face. While it was so much fun when she was in elementary. Suggestions?
Yeah, you know, it's scary. And you know, in today's world, there are lots of ways you can get into lots of trouble. The one that scares me the most is drugs, and you know, with fentanyl out there all over the place, you know, one pill can end your life and does. So, you know, you want to really educate your kids. You know, don't ever take a pill without knowing what it is. Certainly don't go to one of these parties where everybody dumps all their pills in a big fishbowl and you take a handful. I mean, that happens routinely. So you want to really, you know, you don't want to nag them to death because they'll tune you out, but you want to level with them and let them know what the dangers are, and have a relationship with them where you're not lecturing them, you're connecting with them, you're brainstorming with them. You know, you want them to be able to be honest with you. You want them to be able to say, you know, mommy, I was making out and the next thing I knew I was having sex, and is this a terrible thing? And you want to be able to say to her, I'm so glad you can tell me. Now we'll decide what to do, and what was it like, and how did you feel? And you know, you just don't want to have them be afraid to talk to you, to be honest with you, because you know, that's when bad things happen. You know, one of my favorite rules is never worry alone. So with your daughter, you want to tell her, please never worry alone. I will never punish you, get mad at you, ground you, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, as long as you're being honest with me, because we can solve a problem we know about, but I can't help you with stuff I don't know about. I can speculate, I can wonder, I can imagine, but if I don't know what's going on, and I'm your biggest ally. So try to have that kind of relationship with her where you know, when she was a little girl, you could control things a lot more. Now you got to rely on her trusting you, and in return, you trusting her. Will she betray that trust? Yeah, she'll lie to you without doubt. She'll do things you wish she hadn't done, almost certainly. But don't say, okay, now I don't trust you anymore. Say, now you did something that most girls and boys your age do. You did something you wish you hadn't. That's okay. You know, let's talk about how to undo it or redo it, or, you know, learn from it. You know, you want to always stay out of the judging modality and always stay into the understanding. So you can't get rid of impulsivity. Of all the forces in the world of ADHD, it is the most difficult to control. I am still impulsive. You know, I don't ask women I meet to marry me anymore, but I do sometimes say things that are inappropriate, and I come up with ideas that are, you know, not practical at all, and I become sort of the victim of my own enthusiasms, and that's the price I pay for being who I am. But I like who I am, and you know, so I've you know, and it's because of the Mrs. Eldridges along the way, by the way. I had a very rocky childhood, and by statistics, I shouldn't be here. I'm 72, and you know, life is good. I should be dead or marginalized, but the reason I'm not is because of folks like you. It's because of caring adults who took an interest in me, teachers, coaches, other people's parents. I found other Mrs. Eldridges. Every year there was someone or another who became my guardian without even knowing she or he was doing that. You know, so make sure your daughter, just have her really believe in the phrase "never worry alone," because it's when you worry alone that the bad things happen. That's when you make the bad decisions. It's when you do the things you wish you hadn't. And the only way, you know, to impress upon her "never worry alone" is to create a space between the two of you that is full of trust and low on judgment.
There's another question, Dr. Hallowell, about dealing with anxiety in children with ADHD. Maybe you can speak about that a little bit.
Well, you know, as I said earlier, the anxiety and what can look like depression are the natural side effects, the natural byproducts of untreated ADD. If you have ADD and it's not treated, you're going to underperform. You're not going to do as well as you might do. You could be first in your class, like I was, but I was underperforming. I could have done better, and it's unsettling, not to say depressing, to be underachieving and not know why. And then so you blame yourself. You say, I must not be disciplined enough. I must not be a hard enough worker. I must be stupid. A lot of these kids conclude that they're stupid, that they don't have, you know, they're very hard on themselves. And so it can look like depression, or, you know, a little bit of depression, but it's really untreated ADD. And then the anxiety part, as I mentioned earlier, is perfectly obvious. If you don't know what you're going to forget, overlook, misspeak, if you don't know when you're going to make a fool of yourself next, you feel anxious, you know, so you're walking around worried and a little bit down on yourself or down on life. But you don't need the anxiety and depression treated in their own right. You need the ADD treated. And by treated, I mean, first of all, understood and named. And then second of all, you work on coaching to give you some techniques, and then a trial of medication. And medication is so misunderstood. When medication is used properly, it is very safe and very effective. Most parents say to me, I don't want to use medication unless it's a last resort. And I say, that's fine. You know, I've written books about how to you know, treat ADD without medication. But why would you not try the most researched and proven intervention that we've got? There's no medication in all of psychiatry that has been researched more than the stimulant medications. So many studies, and they've been around since 1937. Most people think there's some new development. No, amphetamine was used for the first time to treat what we now call ADHD in 1937, and by Dr. Bradley in Providence, Rhode Island. And to say, no, it's a last ditch intervention. It's sort of like saying, okay, let's try a few years of squinting before we try eyeglasses. You know, I don't want to do those eyeglasses. That's pretty drastic. You know, they're disfiguring, you know, they might break, you know, let's not go that far. Let's do good old fashioned squinting. And that's, you know, basically what a lot of people are doing, because they have this brief against medication because the press completely misrepresents it. all they do is talk about the dangers. Why? Because fear sells. And the media wants your eyeballs. So they talk up the dangers. I have never read an article in the popular press saying what a great advanced stimulant medication is. And yet I could line up every single day patients who are saying it's changed my life, changed my child's life, saved my career, saved my school. You know, it's just meds are tremendously misunderstood, which is a shame, you know, because it means that a lot of people who could really get the benefit never do because they're opposed to it. People ask me, do you believe in medication? My answer is it's not a religious principle. It's not a matter of believing in it. You know, it's a tool, and when it works, great. And if it doesn't, don't use it. And it couldn't be more simple. But people approach it as if it were an act of faith, if it were a belief. Well, you don't want to take medication on faith. You want to take it on the basis of science. Unless you're some QAnon nutcase, and we live in this weird world of anti-science that for the life of me, I don't understand. But that's a whole nother topic that we're not here to talk about tonight.
We have another question from Alexandra. Alexandra, you want to ask it?
There we go. I'll figure this out. I just wanted to comment on something Dr. Hollowell mentioned, and just in case someone maybe looks at it in a different way, but with regard to not necessarily needing to treat anxiety and depression because the inattention is the driving force for, you know, underperforming and therefore feeling you know, down on yourself and then being anxious because of, you know, what am I going to do next? Which is absolutely, I mean, clearly you always want to treat what's underlying, what's causing the anxiety and depression. But I speak for myself and also my children. That's not to say that if you have inattention treated, you no longer have or would require medication for anxiety and depression. They're two different, I believe Dr. Hollowell, correct me if I'm wrong, but you were saying two different things. One is address the underlying cause for anxiety and depression, and then, which clearly is, I think, hugely beneficial to use medication. But on the flip side, it doesn't necessarily mean you wouldn't. For example, I didn't realize I had ADD until I was 40. Post 40, I also tried to taper off my medications, and that did not work. It was great to have help for the inattention, but it didn't do away with the other, which is much also a genetic predisposition, if you will, that I have.
I agree with you 100% that, you know, what I'm saying is oftentimes if you treat the ADD, let's say with stimulant medication, what had looked like depression and anxiety disappeared. But if you also have an indwelling anxiety disorder or depressive disorder, and they persist even after you've treated the ADD, then you need to add meds for the depression and the anxiety. Absolutely, absolutely. There are people like you who need, you know, and by the way, there's more than just medication to treat depression and anxiety, but you can use the stimulant medication for the ADD and an SSRI for the depression and anxiety, as well as behavioral interventions. You're absolutely right. And interestingly enough, I say the same thing about depression and anxiety that I say about ADD, that they often contain within them special talents. Most people who have depression are real smart. Most people who have anxiety are real smart and creative. It takes a lot of smarts and creativity to dream up all the nonsense we worry about, being a worrier myself, you know, and so when someone tells me they have an anxiety disorder or depressive disorder, I say, wow, you must be very creative and very smart. It's similar to ADHD and dyslexia. All these things that have been cloaked in stigma, we need to just throw away that stigma. Yes, there's a downside to all of them. depression can lead to suicide. Anxiety can lead to clutching and not going right. But if you get a handle on it, then you can unwrap the gift that the depression and the anxiety is hiding. And next thing you know, like, you look to me like you're a very accomplished woman. And so you've obviously conquered, you've prevailed over these conditions rather than having them prevail over you.
Later in life, right? It's great that there's so much information now with regard to, inattention and so much of the brain. So
By the
thank you.
way, by the way, just to say, all the three things you named, ADD, depression, and anxiety, are powerful predisposers to becoming substance abuse, because you're wanting to self-medicate. You're wanting to change your inner state. And a big chunk of the addicted, substance abusing population has untreated ADD. So you always want to think of that when someone, because they're desperately trying to find some way to feel good about being alive. And what happens, unfortunately, a lot of doctors who don't know whether, well, you're an addict, I can't give you medication. That's like punishing someone for having used the wrong medication by refusing to give them the right medication. And it's, these people are so gifted. I'm telling you, that combination of ADD, depression, and anxiety, I guarantee you, you show me one of those people and I'll show you a brilliant, creative, interesting, fascinating, someone who has tremendous potential. And you throw in substance use and my heart just aches over the misunderstanding, because there is no more despised group by the medical establishment and the general population than people who abuse substances. They are, get out of my emergency room, you're wasting my time, you're despicable. People see it as a failure of the will. Well, that moral diagnosis is what condemns these people to a life of horror and misery. And, we really need to, because the treatment of addiction, which it's important for you to know about this, because addiction is about 10 times more common in people who have ADD, and 80% of addiction begins between the ages of 13 and 23. So you want to be very, very well aware of it. And what happens if it gets identified, typically they get put into some variation on the theme of a 12-step program, which is, God bless AA, God bless 12-step programs. But do you know what the success rate of 12-step treatment is? If you define success as sober for 1 year, it's 15%. That's pretty paltry. I mean,
Something's gone on.
and I'm not saying don't do it. But now that we have medication assisted treatment, the success rate goes up to 70%. Still not anywhere near 100%, but it's a whole lot better than 15%. It begins by getting rid of the moral diagnosis. You're a bad person, you're a weak person, you're, and bringing these people to get help. But it is obviously something you'd rather prevent than have to treat. And so again, a common misconception is, if you take stimulant medication, that's a gateway drug. It increases the rate of addiction. The opposite is true. The opposite is true. And this has been proven in many studies. If you take stimulant medication as you're heading into adolescence, your rate of addiction goes way down. Taking stimulant medication is a very good way to reduce the very high risk that an adolescent will develop a substance use disorder. Thank you for asking that. Thank you for asking that question, Alexander, because I certainly didn't mean to suggest that there's no role for treating anxiety and depression, that the stimulant will take care of it all. It often doesn't.
But as you mentioned, you can look back and see alcoholism in the family. You can see and of course, if you can't get rid of or whatever it is, if it's anxiety or depression, right? You're trying to, as you just mentioned, self-medicate. So it's that's great information. Thank you.
Thank you.
Dr. Hallowell, I don't know if this is still true, but I've come across studies that say the number one group who abuse stimulants are college males who get it from their friends to study. Do you think, is that still the case?
Yeah, it certainly might be. I don't know the numbers, but it is a big problem on college campuses, using stimulants, most notably Adderall, as a performance enhancing drug.
Right.
And they sell them. There's a big black market. You know, you can go to the library at Harvard or Columbia, or, you know, around exam time, and it's like it's like a crack house. I mean, they're all buying and selling their Adderall. The best performance enhancing drug is coffee, is caffeine, you know, and that one is legal. So go to Starbucks instead of the illicit drug trade. It is a big problem, and that's where the press is quite right to write about it and state it. And, you know, I tell all my patients, you know, don't even tell people you have Adderall, because you're going to be in this awkward position where someone's going to say, come on, just give me one. I need to study for this exam. If you do that, it's a felony, you know, and if the wrong person hears about it, you're in deep doo-doo, and it's no joking matter. You want to really, really drum this home. You know, I advise my college age kid, don't tell your roommate. I mean, if you really trust your roommate, go ahead, and keep your meds in a locked box. I don't mean to sound paranoid, but I've just seen disastrous consequences when people are too cavalier about it. You know, and it's a shame, because but it's the way things are. I cannot believe the hour has flown by. I hope you guys have enjoyed it. Have I talked too much? You know, that this is amazing. I mean, I feel like we just started. And
We could have you for another hour, believe me. I know one of the parents, Kirsten, do you want to unmute yourself? You had a question, you raised your hand.
Oh, sorry. Thank you. I was just wondering if you could share your perspective on the pros and cons of letting children with ADHD play video games, and if there's certain limits that we should be mindful of to kind of avoid repetitive behavior.
Yeah, I think screens are like ice cream. You know, they're a fundamental and necessary part of childhood, but too much is bad. Eliminating them, you know, some purists just eliminate. You can't do that. You can't live modern life without access to screens. And to deny video games is like saying, you know, denying, you know, jump rope or something. You know, it's a part of childhood. So, but what you need the kid to learn is the same thing that you have to learn. Adults are doing the same thing. Learn the fine art of moderation. You know, with the abstinence model may work for addiction to substances, but it's not practical for screens, because these screens are necessary for life. So it's more, the analogy is more like food. You know, you don't abstain from food. You try to learn to eat it in moderation. And the same thing with and I think you make it a family undertaking. You know, dad, you know, it gets into trouble with mom just as much as the kid with parents, because dad is on his iPhone, right? I have a female patient who calls her husband's laptop his plastic mistress. You know, I mean, he's always on it, and never with her. And you know, it's a big deal. These screens are very, very, very habit forming, if not addicting. And, you know, it's the same dopamine reaction that gets going with a drug, you know, so you're getting the same hit, you get the same dopamine hit, you log on, you got a new email, there's nothing so seductive as an unopened message. Well, when the mail used to come once or twice a day, that was one thing. Now it comes once or twice a second. And you're constantly sending and receiving insipid, inane messages. And when people say I have more to do than time to do it, my first question is, how much time do you spend on your screen? And I coined a word for it. I call it screen sucking. You go on and you just start sucking away. And you can spend an hour there without even knowing it. Just as I spent an hour with you guys right now and I didn't even know it. But if you're in thrall of a screen, the time can just fly by. And so my suggestion is, don't make it a discipline issue, but make it an issue like for the whole family. Just like we have to learn to eat in moderation, and not pig out at midnight with a gallon of ice cream. So we need to learn to screen in moderation. So we are in charge of the screen, so the screen is not in charge of us. And believe me, this screen addiction thing is a real issue. There are, and the attendant, it's not just what you do on screens, you know, that's caused a big spike in gambling and sex addiction, but it's shopping and spending. You know, my wife thinks I'm a shopaholic. She thinks I've got an Amazon addiction. You know, all these packages show up on our porch every day. And what is going on with you? And she's got a point. I've got to rein it in a little bit. You know, so it's very tempting for not just for children, but and I think if you can level with your kids and say, you know, mommy and daddy are working on this too, and let them call you out just as you're calling them out, then it evens the playing field, because it is true. I mean, it's something that we all struggle with. I've never met someone who doesn't struggle with it. And it's, you know, but you don't want to throw out the baby with the bathwater and condemn screens as if they're the creation of the devil, because they're a wonderful tool. We're using them right now. But at the same time, they can be, and you all know the stories, particularly with adolescents, how destructive they can be.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. This has been amazing tonight. I think if we don't have any other questions, we should probably start to wrap it up.
Well, thank you all. Thank you all for
Thank you.
your attention. And if you should want to reach me, just go to my website. It's drhallowell.com, no period, hallowell.com. You know, you're a wonderful group, and I hope what I've had to say tonight has been helpful.
Very helpful. Thank you.
Thank you.
Take
Thank
care,
you.
you guys.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Thank you, Dr.
Good
Hallowell.
night. Thanks so
Bye-bye.
much.